Welcome to the Friends of Work podcast, the podcast about mastering emotional intelligence at work.
I started my career at 18 years old with Marriott International. So I come from an event management background. It's really the core of everything I've done in my career. I worked for Marriott International. I worked for the PGA Tour. When Michael Jordan was in Washington, D.C., I worked for him for a restaurant that he opened to do some large-scale events. I worked for Club Corps of America. And then right before starting my own company, I went to work for a speaker who did seminars on communication. And I went to work for him because I wanted to learn how a small business ran from the inside out so that I knew what to do when I started my organization.
Hi, I'm Taylor, the host of the Friends of Work podcast. The full conversation with Christina Taylor Serrano will continue after this brief announcement. In the coming weeks, the Friends of Work podcast with Adetoye will be bringing you even more exciting guests and events. To support this podcast and to learn more about our future plans, please go to patreon.com/friendsatwork. That is patreon.com/friendsatwork. Thank you.
So my name is Christina Taylor. I own TaylorMade Experience. We're an event management and fundraising firm. We work with nonprofit organizations and corporations to plan their large-scale events. We've been in business for 10 years. We have about 8 employees, and we work with wonderful organizations.
What were you doing before this organization started?
Before TME, I started my career at 18 years old with Marriott International. So I come from an event management background. It's really the core of everything I've done in my career. I worked for Marriott International. I worked for the PGA Tour. When Michael Jordan was in Washington, D.C., I worked for him for a restaurant that he opened to do some large-scale events. I worked for Club Corps of America. And then right before starting my own company, I went to work for a speaker who did seminars on communication. And I went to work for him because I wanted to learn how a small business ran from the inside out so that I knew what to do when I started my organization. So that was kind of my career path.
Wow. So, hey, you throw in names like Michael Jordan. Okay, so now you're hanging with me. I'm a superstar too. You have to put me in there somewhere.
I will name you in my future interviews.
Well, that's great. So you've had a lot of good experience, I can see. So what has it been like running your own business? You said this is your first decade running it, right?
Yes, we celebrated 10 years this year in February.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And it's been wonderful. I mean, you hear a lot from small business owners that it is a struggle. I wouldn't say it was a struggle necessarily. I haven't had any really nasty hiccups in the first 10 years. However, it is a lot of hard work. And so you really have to dig in and work a lot of hours. It's true what they say, when you're self-employed, you work twice as hard as someone who's employed by an organization. And I truly believe that. But again, I didn't have the typical kind of struggles that you hear sometimes entrepreneurs talk about. I've had slow growth, slow, steady, consistent growth over the years that we've been in business. We've never had a bad year. So we've grown every single year from a financial standpoint, from an employee standpoint, and looking forward to the next 10.
Okay. So what made you decide it was time to run your own business? Because as someone who's run his own business and who's running his own business, sometimes I think entrepreneurs are crazy. I'm just
it's true. I think you have to have a little crazy to be an entrepreneur.
Yes. Like, why would you wake up in the morning and say, "Oh, I'm going to start my business"?
Sure.
And then you find out, like you said, you work. Did you say twice as hard?
Yeah.
Maybe thrice as hard as
Yes.
somebody getting paid, because
Correct.
even when you're supposedly relaxing,
Yes.
you're thinking about work, right?
Correct. Yes.
So
Yeah.
what was your emotional state going into this? And
I have to say there was obviously a little bit of fear. I think everyone has that. I was very young when I knew I wanted to have my own business. And I kind of joke because I come from a background of, my parents are government employees. They've been IRS employees for 40 plus years. My father retired last year. My mother's retiring this year. They've both dedicated their entire careers to the Internal Revenue Service. And so coming from that type of family, they looked at me like I was crazy when I said I wanted to start my own company. And a lot of what they would tell me when I was younger, they didn't say to scare me, but it was scary, because they would tell me the statistics of how many businesses failed, how many small businesses are tax evaders, and how they don't really know that they're not filing their taxes properly, but that they get into a lot of trouble with the IRS, and how many businesses fail within the first few years of being put in business. So that fear, of course, held me back a little bit as far as, but I think it didn't necessarily hold me back. I should change the language there. It actually made me want to be more prepared. So that's why I actually searched out my last job before I started TME, which was to work for a small business and really find out what is it like to really run a small business from the back side of it. I was Stephen Gaffney's business manager for 4 years before I started my own company.
Nice.
When he interviewed me, he teaches honest communication. He asked me what was my 5-year plan, and I said to be self-employed in 2.
Okay.
And he laughed during the interview. And so it took me 4 because I really enjoyed his work and enjoyed working with him, and I had a lot to learn. So I took 4 years and opened my company when I was just about 30, or maybe 30, 31. And so from there, I again knew that I wanted to do this. I knew that I wanted to have my own business. I think the flexibility is what really drove me. I wanted to be my own boss and have my own, be able to do things on my own terms. And I think that was the driving factor.
I like that. And I'm happy for you that you've been successful. I mean, the stats, when you look out there, I've read a bunch of stats out there that the first 5 years, 90% of business kind of like die in the first 5 years.
Yeah.
And 90% of those that survive after die in the next 5 years, and it seems yours is still growing.
Yeah, that first 5-year hump
success.
is a big deal. Yeah, I remember getting to 5 years and saying to my parents, like, look, I got to 5. I didn't fail in the first 5 like most, that they were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to also, I think sometimes a lot of us look at the glass half empty, and sometimes it's good to look at it half full and just
my first
be grateful.
employee, actually, Jen McNulty, she used to say that she is a glass half empty person, but she said, I am a glass runneth over person.
Nice.
It was a very cute saying that she came up with.
Nice. And I think that also kind of like speaks to the attitude one needs to have to be successful in business, and kind of like looking over some of the challenges and just moving forward.
Sure.
So in light of that, I'm sure, especially as an event management person, you've been in a lot of stressful situations, either with clients or even with staff or whatever. So how have you been dealing, or can you speak to an event or a situation that you can think of?
Oh, yeah.
And
how long do we have?
That's good. All right. And how you've dealt with stressful situations.
Sure. I mean, again, one of the ongoing kind of jokes within our company is that we're waiting for the first perfect event, where nothing goes wrong. And unfortunately, I think that just doesn't happen because you cannot control other people as much as I'd love to, because I'm a control freak. I would love to be able to control others. However, unfortunately, I cannot. And so because you have a lot of players at an event, at any event, you have to be able to go with the flow. And I can think of an example that was really just a stressful moment for me. Early on in my career, I was working with the American Society of Clinical Oncologists. So this organization brings together 30,000 oncologists in Chicago every year. And we were working on a small event for them in New York at the Stock Exchange. And we were doing a very high-end reception for their very high-end donors, their board. And we were going to do a bell ringing where they would basically bring their folks to the New York Stock Exchange floor. They would ring the bell, the closing bell at the end of the day, and have a reception on the Stock Exchange floor following that. And so we had one of the first oncology doctors that they were honoring that day was a woman in a wheelchair. And I did not realize that the Stock Exchange building was not equipped for wheelchair access. And so we had to get her to the balcony at the Stock Exchange that you normally are used to seeing on the news when they ring the closing bell. Well, that is up like 3 flights of stairs through a very small passageway and has no elevator access or ramp access whatsoever. So I had to run around like a crazy person finding, the solution was I found 4 New York City police officers that are on site at the New York Stock Exchange.
Okay.
They carried her from down below to the actual balcony.
Where she needed to be.
And then they carried her back down.
So were you freaking out around that time?
A little bit. I mean, I don't really freak out very often, but I did think like, wow, how am I going to do this? This is going to be, I love to problem solve. That was a huge problem. And so having to find people to help me do that, knowing that I could not lift this woman was a challenge. So, but they were incredibly helpful. It all went well. No one in the front audience knew what was going on. Everything worked out. That's a successful event when the people on the what I call the other side of the curtain don't see anything that happens behind the scenes.
Yeah.
That's a successful event.
Wow, that's just as you were describing the event. I was just like, I'm sweating right now just thinking about it. Like, how
Yes.
would you? And how did she feel?
Well, I mean, she was a much older woman. She was just kind of very gracious, like, "Oh no, I don't have to go up. I don't need to be there. I can stay down here." And we knew how important it was for her to be on the stage. She was one of the first female oncology doctors, and she was one of the first female African American oncology doctors. So it was incredibly important for her to be there, and I felt the need to make sure that happened, that she was in the shot, on the stage. And so we made it happen.
Great. So we made it happen. I think that should be your slogan. We
Yeah.
made it happen.
Yeah.
And just looking at that, I'm looking very much into relationship management right now. Looking at this situation, how did you get the offices? How do you think in the moment, just being spontaneous and say, okay, I want to get this person to try and help this solve this problem? What's the thinking behind that? Do you think is it a trained attitude, or is this just something that you have naturally?
I think it's more natural. I think it's very hard to train people to, well, I shouldn't say that. I think that training comes from a very young age. And
Okay.
so I think that my training was my upbringing, and my
Okay.
family was very much into problem solving, figuring things out, not giving you the answer. I used to joke that I had, I'm older, so I used to have Encyclopedia Britannicas in my house. There was no Google when I was a kid, and unfortunately, because
I
I would have been
remember
able
those
to, I
too.
would have been able to find things out a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Now Google is my best friend, but I used to have to really find things out because my parents would not give me answers. They would tell me, go figure it out and come back and tell us what you found. And so I think that problem solving attitude and also being able to bounce back and figure things out and be quick about things all comes from your upbringing. So my team knows that I joke in our office about the fact that I feel like parenting plays a big role in how people turn out and the skills that they have.
Yeah.
So I'll sometimes joke that if I see someone who has great problem solving skills and is very positive, and that they had great parents, and obviously the opposite, not so great parents. So I think in that instance that what you're talking about, being kind to people, I think is the first thing. Going up and really trying to be very kind and implore the officers to help me. They immediately saw that I had a need, and I was very nice in my request. And then being able to quickly figure out what the solution is, and then going about it. And the one thing also I think that's key, especially in our business, and also I think in life in general, is being able to bounce back from things, not letting that upset me or bog me down for the day. Being able to say, okay, it was a hurdle, we got past it, let's keep moving. Versus what a lot of people do, I think, is get very in the weeds and
Yeah.
get very down. And I think that obviously doesn't help any situation.
I mean, it definitely can help in your business.
Sure.
Because you solve one problem, another shows up, and
Yeah.
you just, until the event is done, it's not
Right.
done, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so switch gears slightly and say, okay, now we've looked outward at reaching out to clients. What about inward in terms of how do you keep staff morale? Because I know that sometimes you've talked about parenting and the idea that it's so I keep wanting to speak a different language, and I'll tell you why. I was born and raised in Nigeria. I speak Yoruba as a first language, and there is a saying in my culture which is roughly translates that the training you get at home is the training you take to the world.
Yeah, I love it. That's perfect.
Yes,
I'm going to use that.
and so looking at staff morale and just taking that as a background to it.
Sure.
So how do you help your staff, and how have you done that to be able to take the same kind of energy that I am experiencing having this conversation with you and we're hearing from you? How do you take that? How do you help that, build that kind of morale with your organization that allows you to take that out to your clients?
Right. A couple things. I think one is we have a culture within our organization where we're very family oriented. We're a small team. We're all women. And so it is very easy for us to have good camaraderie in that sense. I think that one of the kind of culture things within our organization is that we work very hard and we play very hard. So I like to make sure that our team is appreciated and that they, again, work very hard during our busier seasons, and then when we have some downtime, we go to the spa together, we get manicures and pedicures together, we, again, all girl things. Not that men can't enjoy those things, but we don't allow any in our circle just yet. And so I think that that's one thing I think to keep us as a cohesive team. I think the other thing is, one thing you mentioned is my consistency, I think, is important. Like I joke that I have some friends in my life and some clients in my life that I'm not really sure how they're going to be in a certain day when I see them. I think my whole team would attest that I'm pretty much the same person every single day. And there's very little, there's very few moments where I have any down moments or any, upset moments. It's more the consistency and like the positivity and the let's move this forward, let's keep this moving. I think also as we've grown over the years, I've become a resource for the team to use me in difficult situations. And so when we have clients that we need to have a more difficult conversation with, I can come in and really help course correct what we're doing with the client. And that I think adds to me being more of a resource and not in the weeds of all of our client work, but working to help them move the project forward and have a successful outcome with our clients, because they are annual organizations. We typically work with all of our clients on an annual basis.
Okay.
So these are not folks that we work with once and they go away. They're people that we've been with for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so it's important that we keep that ongoing open relationship with them, and that it's positive, because we want them to obviously re-sign with us the following year.
Yes. So what I'm hearing is you do a lot of mentoring and do a lot of bonding events. That's great. Okay, so did you decide that as a policy that you were not going to have any men in your organization?
We did not,
actually.
Okay,
so I've seen most of your stuff, all pretty women. I'm like, oh, walk in. I'm like, hey. All right, where are the guys? Where's the guys?
Not discriminate against anyone. No, we actually, what's funny is I think our business as a whole is very predominantly female. There's a lot of women in event management positions across the board. So I don't think that is anything really that different for us than a lot of other organizations that I've seen that are in the same genre of work as us. And even in the hotel industry, when you have event managers or sales managers in those roles, a lot of times they're women as well. So I think it's just a more female predominant industry. And we're not opposed. We would welcome. It just whenever we open a position, we get a lot of female applicants, and typically women seem to beat out the boys.
People say women are better at multitasking than men, right? And events management, you're probably doing, sometimes when you're executing, you're probably doing many things at the same time.
Sure.
And guys are like, I want to fix this one thing. And
right.
women are like, okay.
And we have to manage 100 details. Yes.
Exactly.
I joke that my husband can do one thing and I can do 100 in the same time that he does the one. So, yes.
I bet that's true for most women or most families. It's good. So, talking about family and your husband, how has it been? I want to kind of deal with this with myself, just saying out loud, the fact that the question I'm about to ask, I rarely ask men, but somehow it seems natural to ask women.
Okay.
Which is how do you manage family and business?
Yeah, it's sad that you don't ask men that question.
It's sad
right?
now. I'm just kind of like,
Yeah.
I need to ask men that question.
In this day
too.
and age, you should ask everyone.
Especially, yeah, that's true.
No, but it is still.
But it's still an important question to ask.
Right, and I think we're still in a time when, unfortunately, things have not fully changed. I mean, I think some organizations are offering paternity leave now, and they're doing better when it comes to making sure that it's not the woman who is the main caretaker at home.
Yes.
But it is a valid question. You know, it's interesting. I think I mentioned before we started that I've been with my husband for 20 years, and we've only been married for 3, and we have a 2-year-old. And so it took a long time to really get to that stage. And I think the reason that it did for me was that I was very driven in my career and thought that my personal life was kind of on the back burner to that. And I recognized throughout our relationship that he was a very solid foundation for me and a rock kind of. I joke that sometimes he's a little bit more of a homebody and not as go as I am. And I think that when I was younger, I saw that as a negative, but now I see that as a big positive. And the fact that he's incredibly supportive and I can count on him to be home and be with our child when I have to go and do an event in the evenings. And he's an incredible father and loves our daughter. And so it's comforting now for me that, but again, when I was younger, I didn't have the same thoughts about it. So it took me a while to really get to that mature stage. and recognize that.
that's an asset, and that,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
that just if you were both go, but it would really
we'd probably
been
hate
tough.
each other. Yes.
And it's
I had
like,
a very wise, one of my girlfriends is a very wise mother who said to me a long time ago that she said, you will appreciate this as you get older. The values that you don't necessarily see are the most important things in Jose, my husband. And she was absolutely right.
great. We need more female entrepreneurs, as far as I'm concerned. There needs to be more women out there doing all the things that they love to do and contributing to society in a bigger way, and heading businesses like you do and growing them. And so can you talk a bit about some of the challenges, maybe not just for you personally, but that you see for female entrepreneurs in the business space, and advice to how to overcome them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm part of a women's group called Her Corner. They're a organization here in the DC metro area that's growing actually across the country. And we talk a lot in our Her Corner sessions about obstacles that that female entrepreneurs face. And a lot of times it has to do with funding. Still now, I don't know the exact statistics, but still today, it is incredibly difficult for a woman to get a loan for a business, very much different than when a male applies for a loan for a business. And so funding, I've never gone into looking into any kind of venture capital money or angel investing. I've always done this as a grassroots effort for myself, so I've never taken any kind of loans. But I know that some women who start businesses need that loan or that initial seed money, and they are not able to get it as easily as a man. And there's been different studies that have come out where if the woman takes her husband to take the loan, then she gets it a lot easier. And so that's really unfortunate, and hopefully that changes over the next few years. I think also one of the obstacles is what you were asking me about family. Women are much more I think engaged in the home. Not to say that men are not, but we have a lot more responsibility. And as much as we like to think that sometimes we have 50-50 relationships at home, it's really not the case in any instance. And I'd argue any man about that. So I think, running a business and running a household, it's like 2 full-time jobs. And then trying to keep, a very healthy marriage. I mean, that's another full-time job. So we juggle a lot. And I think our priorities are that our home comes first. And even for me, as much as I love my organization, obviously if, my husband or my daughter needs something, that's going to come before my company. And so, I try to keep a good, healthy balance, but I think that's also a challenge for us and why it's more difficult for us to grow. I think there are a lot of women out there doing amazing things, and it's growing. Like there are a lot of more, I see so many female entrepreneurs within this Her Corner group and doing great things and choosing to do what they want to do. I have a friend who was a lawyer. She became a cake pop baker. She owns a cake pop shop over by the zoo. I mean, talk about a huge career transition. But just no longer, I think women are no longer wanting to kind of climb that corporate ladder that unfortunately that glass ceiling does, as much as we hope other females break it or shatter it. It's still there in some instance in the corporate world. If you look at corporate websites, they're still run by, males at the top. There's many organizations that are infusing women into the leadership, but it's a slow road. So I think, being true to yourself and figuring out what it is that you want and finding ways to do that effectively that still keeps your family life intact, makes you happy on a daily basis. I have friends who have jobs where they come home and they hate their work every day. And I'm like, why do you go and do it then? There's too many opportunities out there, especially in our country, that doesn't make sense for you to go to work every day and not like what you're doing. So I feel like the best advice is just to stay positive and move forward and find something that you really enjoy and find people to support you. I can't necessarily name like a lot of mentors in my past. I feel like I did a lot on my own, which I think also in some instances is a little sad, because I think a lot of women need to look back and pull up the next one instead of just kind of going forward on your own and not really engaging with other people.
Which
and
is repeating the same mistakes of the past.
Exactly. And not having support too. I think for women, we like a very supportive environment. We like to have like group conversation and so I think that, women who don't necessarily look back and try to help the next woman really should try to do that. And also with our young girls, teaching them to really be strong women and to grow up to have the kind of, values and principles that we were talking about earlier with work ethic and drive, and teaching them that they can really do whatever, they want to do when they grow up.
Thank you for listening to this episode. You can support this podcast by going to patreon.com/friends at work. That's patreon.com/friends at work. You can also reach me by email at myfriendtoye@gmail.com. My Facebook page is Friends at Work Podcast, and my Twitter handle is at Friends at Work US. Join me next time for another episode of Friends at Work Podcast with Ade Toye. Bye for now.